Welcome to the Doctors of Running Virtual Roundtable, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, discuss the art and science of running and the stuff that we're putting on our feet. Today is episode number 97. We're creeping our way closer to that 100th episode, which feels kind of wild. This has been a really fun project, and it's been fun to see the engagement from people, and we just love getting to have a little bit longer form conversations. So episode number 97, we are going to be doing an old school shoe review today. We're going to bring in some questions that we've gotten from our YouTube videos and through some emails. So we'll be bringing those into the conversation. But first, we want to talk about a subjective. And the subjective is actually inspired by some conversations we've had in our group chats about things that we've a little bit disagreed on and trying to define some definitions. So what we want to know from everybody is, what makes a shoe soft for you? When you say this shoe feels soft, tell us what that means. And you can drop that below if you're watching on YouTube. You can drop that below in the comments, or you can email it to us at doctorsofrunningpodcast@gmail.com. Or I think on Spotify, there should be a place where you can also comment. But we'd love to hear your definition of what it means for a shoe to be soft. And at the round table today is actually just Matt and I. It's a skeleton crew, which is fun to just hang out together. But Matt, when you think about what makes a shoe soft to you, what is it for you, and why are we even talking about this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm going to try to stay on track with my answer since my mind went in a billion places at once.
Good luck.
So when I think about soft, I think about a shoe that when I put it on or I walk or run in it, it just gives quite a bit under my foot. So it just feels, I'm hesitating using this word because we just had a conversation about this, being careful. Like, it feels really cushioned, but I've also used that term with a shoe that has a lot of stack height that's also firmer, so I have to be really careful. That's the challenge, right, of using the consistency with terms. But yeah, generally something that there's a lot of give underneath my foot. So it just feels, and I'm even wondering, is soft even the right description of this?
Yeah, I think
that's a good question. That
accentuates the point. There is not a consensus on what defines soft. There isn't a consensus on what defines ride. Like, there's no way to really hone those in. And I think when I asked people, because the age-old debate at DOR and like now joke that I get trolled about all the time I think the Bondi X is soft and DJ thinks it's very firm. And so asking, why do we experience it different? Is it because we actually experience it different, or is our definition of softness different? So I asked everybody on our chat, what makes a shoe feel soft to you? And people did have different things. For me, it's not so much like, do my toes sink into the foam, or can I like feel what I would call mushiness? Like, a shoe can feel mushy, like thinking about the Nimbus 24. For me, that shoe feels like mushy soft. And that is one part of softness. But then there's other shoes that we have, even similar. We could say Endorphin Pro 3. You could say the Prime X. Some of these like really high stack shoes, for me, the Bondi X, that the foam feels like kind of steady under your toes. It's not like you sink into the foam. But when you start to load it, the foam compresses a lot. Yeah. And for me, that sensation feels soft. But for the other people on our team, that's not what feels soft. It's more of, what does your foot interaction with the platform feel like? So those are two different definitions of softness. And, you know, I think we all agree that softness changes once you start to run. Softness can be different in heel and forefoot. But what we even think softness is different, which leads us to thinking something being, for me, something soft is something firm for somebody else. And I found that pretty interesting.
And that's also going to be a challenge, is not to go in a really like science geek, biomechanical, but just human body mode. There's been a lot of research on trying, I think, to define that. I think what's been found is that it's really individual. You know, how we move and how we sense the world around us is totally unique. We call that our sensory system. How you interpret what's underneath your foot, underneath your body, is going to be totally different. So, you know, ride quality is going to be subjective. So maybe the question is, how do we use better terms that are more universal? Going, hey, this shoe, you know, there. But yeah, even then, you know, that might vary. So that's a very, you know, good subjective question, because this is subjective, right? Comfort. When we talk about the comfort filter and the comfort paradigm, it is very subjective. That's why we always emphasize you're going to have to find something that works for you. And I'm actually happy that a lot of us don't, when we talk on here, we don't also necessarily agree, because that means that when people come to Doctors of Running and read the reviews, look for the reviews where there's hopefully multiple people, because that means you're going to get multiple opinions. And if you know somebody's like, hey, my mechanics or my sensations kind of similar to this person, look for that person's review. Whether that's on Doctors of Running, whether it's a different review site, it's kind of like finding what works for you, because our perception of the world around us, whether it be proprioception or sensory or even
just
visually,
right,
it's going to vary. Add definitions too. So that was the tangent I was holding back.
No, I love that tangent, because I think we're pretty open about that all the time. And I think that's why, running and ride and responsiveness, like these are all, you can measure things, right? Like you can put them in impact machines and like look at the metrics of a foam and all that stuff. But how we experience that is different for all the reasons you just mentioned. And so we get to,
because you've got,
that's why these sites are fun, because people experience things differently. So it's valuable to hear people's opinions.
Right. You're going to get some I got to geek out for a second. You're going to get some variation on that with like, hey, how much does the platform compress, but also how much do your joints, how much do they move? How much that kind of stuff. That's, I already basically said that.
Right.
I'm just repeating myself.
No, I love reiteration.
Yeah.
And repetition. Drills
Repetition's
things home.
Key for learning. Yep.
Also, this is just popping in my head randomly, but be curious to hear what you guys think. I'm wearing one of our Doctors of Running kind of just logoed shirts. Would people be interested in like having access to apparel? We've talked about it, but we didn't know if people actually would wear it. So if you wouldn't, let us know. If you would, let us know. If there's a big enough interest, we might try to find a way to source out some apparel for people, but that could be fun. That is totally not on topic at all. Any last things
how long has this been since we had that conversation? Were you just thinking about that? I feel we've talked about this multiple times, but never like, should we do that?
I think we talked about it last like 3 or 4 months ago, even 5 months ago.
Yeah. I think it was 5, 6.
It's fine. Let us know.
Yeah.
Drop a comment if you think if you think that would be worth it. Let us know. And if you know any good ways to go about it, so that let us know that too, if there's a good kind of pathway. So, any last things on softness though, Matt?
Yeah, I think we need to define it better, and each person's going to figure out what that means for them, right? So. Right. And if that's even something that you like, I mean, there's certain people that may not like the feeling of that much give underfoot. I know for a long time I didn't like that until I kind of got used to it, just because we got so many of these types of shoes. I'm like, oh, I actually kind of like this over time. So you just have to find what it means to you, and that meaning may vary too. Right. Cool. So we are going to be doing a review today, and it's going to be of the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3. This is the biggest update for sure since this shoe came out. But before we do that, we wanted to let you know that this episode is sponsored by Karhu Lifestyle. Karhu, you guys might have heard of them from, well, we've had them sponsor the podcast before, but also they have a running line of running shoes like the Saucony and the Synchron and the Fusion. But they also have a lot of lifestyle apparel and footwear. So, I have the Tempus, which I've always said this when we do these ads, but it reminds me of my Sambas that I used to wear all the time, except they're a little bit more comfortable. So they have a really nice, speaking of soft, they have a really soft sock liner, more mushy soft. And then they're just comfortable shoes. They can help you, for those lifestyle times, but they're running shoe inspired casual shoes, which is what I think our team has enjoyed about them, is they're comfortable and they walk well. They do usually run a little bit small. So going even like a half size or full size up, we would recommend that. If you want to check them out, you can go to karhu.com. That's KARHU.com. And you can use the promo code DOR2022, DOR 2022. And that gets you 20% off of your order. So you can check out karhu.com and use that promo code if you want to check out their lifestyle collection. All right, so Endorphin Speed 3. So what we're going to do with this review is we're going to go through specs. Matt's got the specs. And then what we're going to do is talk about fit.
But then we're going to jump over and answer some questions because there are a lot of questions regarding ride, regarding stability. And so we'll let those guide our conversations. But Matt, can you start us off with the specs of this shoe?
Yeah, so updated specs, it is the weight's going to be different. Stack height is supposedly the same, but doesn't quite feel like it. But so men's size 9 is 8.1 ounces now. Women's size 8 is 7.2 ounces. So up just a little bit from the last version, not too much considering how drastically different this shoe is. Stack height is supposedly still the same. It's 36 millimeters in the heel, 28 in the forefoot, and that does include the sock liner, correct? I believe. Yep. And there's an 8 millimeter drop. Nylon plate in the forefoot. They've got an S plate as usual. Some of the big changes, though, is that nylon plate actually has wings that come out both on the lateral and the medial side. So some big changes.
Yeah, big changes. The colors we got sent are just all blue and yellow, which I just have to give the Warriors a shout out for DJ because he's not here with us. Their Warriors colors, as he would call them, championship colors. You still get some outsole coverage, but it's shaped a little bit differently. But we'll get into that as we answer questions. But Matt, what would you say when it comes to fit for this model? How would you describe the upper and how it fit on your foot?
Yeah, this was interesting where the last version kind of fit snug for me but almost like a teeny bit long. This kind of went the opposite way where it feels a little bit wider through the forefoot and midfoot, but if it's just a hair short, like I notice it when I'm putting it on, and then when I start running, it disappears. So feels a little like it has a little bit more volume to the upper too, and I definitely had to lock it down a little bit more, which I didn't have to do with the last one because it was a little more snug. But yeah, different fit. What'd you find?
Yeah, I would say the previous versions were very dialed in from a performance trainer standpoint. This one takes a tick in the direction of being more of a trainer upper, but still has some of that qualities of locking down the midfoot well and keeps a narrow heel. But yeah, I think the volume of the forefoot is bigger. I personally didn't have any length issues. I thought it was fine. I know you, like you just said, that it had, you may have felt it be a little short, but I didn't have any of that at all. It's really breathable. You can see through the mesh kind of openings in the toe box. I personally loved, as the certified DOR lace snob, I loved the tongue and the laces. The laces are flat laces that have just the touch of elasticity. So that combined with the little bit of padding they put in here, it's one of those you can crank it down with no irritation on the top of your foot. It wraps up really nicely, and it just so you could really lock it in if you had to. But I didn't have any heel slippage or anything. There is kind of a mildly rigid heel counter in this, similar to it's been in the previous versions, and it's no irritation for me. But how about you?
Yeah, it's definitely a little stiffer than the last version. I didn't have any problems, but my heels have been doing pretty well. I've been taking very good care of them. Yeah, so I'd say people that are pretty sensitive, you might want to approach this with a little bit of caution, but most people are going to be totally fine. And they're going to find that the heel is really locked in because that counter like wraps the foot really, really well. Mm-hmm. And the heel is on the snug side. I didn't have any slippage either, and I'm the one who usually has that if it's going to happen. So
right. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree on the tongue. It's one of those things I think talking with you and then paying more attention to this, the tongue has been something I'm starting to get really like snobby about, where it's like I really want this thing to be gusseted, and this does it really where it's not the whole thing where it kind of like totally envelops your foot, but it's got that nice wrap around through like kind of like the posterior midfoot, and it locks in well, and it's one of those uppers like, hey, I kind of feel a little bit up here, but then it just gets out of the way.
Right.
So, and I don't notice it at all. And that's kind of one of those classes like, is good, bad? If it gets out of the way and you don't notice it, great. If it stays and you notice on the run, yeah, this is one that gets out of the way. So it's been pretty solid.
Awesome. All right. So we are going to transition to talking about some questions that people have given us either through email or from YouTube. So this first one is from Steve Nicholas, and he's asking question. He says, I love the Speed 1, but found it a bit firm for longer runs. So we're getting into softness again. Did you find the Speed 3 a bit softer and more forgiving? So I can use it as more of a daily trainer. Can you just plod along and do recovery paces rather than feel like you're forced to run fast? So what do you think, Matt, on that question? I think there's a couple things there. How soft does it feel? Does it feel softer at all? How does it perform at slow paces compared to previous?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, which goes right into the comment about like, how does this ride? So for me, the Speed 1, I had a lot of difficulty using for easy runs. Just it was also really unstable, so I didn't do as well there. Speed 2 is a little bit better. We'll get there later. Speed 2 is a little bit better. This one, yes, it feels like I felt like there was plenty of cushioning underfoot. And it didn't feel so aggressive. Where you have those like super stiff, super light shoes. You're like, I probably shouldn't be training in this. This I didn't have the problem, right? There's still some flexibility through there, plenty of cushioning underfoot. I thought it initially felt like it was softer than some of the originals, but now it's kind of similar, I think, to the last one in terms of like compression of the foam underfoot. So yeah, I think you can totally use this for easy runs, and I have done plotting and easy runs in this shoe just fine without an issue. And it's actually really nice to have a well-cushioned shoe that's still really light, because I like lightweight trainers, but that's just me. So I would say yes. Nathan, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say it definitely felt different at slower paces compared to the previous versions. However, I would still say it runs, when you go slower, it runs only mildly soft. Like I think there's some give to it, but it's overall slightly firmer. I'm even afraid to say firmer, but slightly firmer, just more rolling ride that operates off of speed roll. But it has a little bit of give to it. And I took this on a run more than an hour and a half at a slow pace in a really hilly area, and I had no issues at all going slower for that. I've taken this shoe at much faster tempo paces and a couple recovery runs, and this was the first time I also appreciated using it for those slower runs too, but we'll get to it later again. But I think that was for me more a relation to the stability aspect of the shoe than it was to the actual foam itself. I think there's a relatively similar feel, except the wider, something we haven't talked about yet, the wider platform in the heel. So there's a couple millimeters base more width in the heel. That adds more foam in the heel, which I think allows you to kind of compress into that a little bit more versus, in the previous ways, it just didn't operate as well. So I felt like it was a nice protective cushion platform for some of those longer runs. And like I said, like we both did some recovery stuff in it, and I thought it functioned really well for that. So, okay, oh yeah, go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
I also think it feels to me that this shoe is also way better beveled than the previous versions. It's not the biggest thing, but I just noticed again that I feel like that helped with transitions better, which made it feel easier on kind of like when I'm slowing down, I'm getting more on that heel and kind of rolling forward. It made it a lot smoother for that kind of stuff too. Whereas a little bit more abrupt in the other versions, there wasn't as much of a bevel.
Yep. Yeah. Made it easier. Just smooth. Pretty darn smooth.
The smooth shoe.
Smooth.
Yep.
With a V.
I hate that term.
Smooth.
We should not use it.
Smooth. All right, moving on, hey? All right, so we had a couple questions about the stability of the shoe, so let's talk about those next. So these, I'm going to read two questions right away, and this first one's from Maiden Machines. This is from YouTube, and they asked, I saw you love the Pro 3. This is addressing Matt specifically. Saw you love the Pro 3 and found them in the very stable neutral. Are the speed the same?
Yeah.
What makes the speed a better daily option? Do you really need to be going quite fast to get carbon plates to respond? I'd like to pick which feels the most fun at the 11 to 12 kilometer per hour, as long as they're both stable. So this is someone who's debating between the Pro 3 and the Speed 3, asking about which one feels better at these 11 to 12 kilometers. Can you do that in your head to miles per hour? We might need to look that up. But, looking at around that pace, like what's that going to be like?
What is that?
You go fast to use plates.
12 kilometers is like 7 miles, right? It's like 7-ish miles. So yeah, that's probably around like 8-ish. It's like 8+ minute pace per mile.
Okay.
Somebody's going to correct me on this, but
and the other question, one more question was from Alex Miller. It says, any sense on this version might verge on the stable neutral territory. I love the plate and PB foam combo, but the last versions were too squirrely through the heel for me. And so what do you think? What would you say? Let's talk first about this whole stability question. And where do you put it in the stability question, and why?
So I personally, based on my mechanics, I could not train for longer miles in the last two. It was just like max, like maybe 6 to 8 miles. I couldn't do anything more. I've taken this on long runs, no issue. It's not a stability shoe. I want to repeat that. It is not a stability shoe, but I think it's now bordering on that stable neutral for a couple reasons. One of the biggest ones is that they just widen the platform. So with a wider platform, it's gonna be inherently more stable, especially because they filled in the midfoot a lot more than previous, and the heel was super wobbly in some of the other versions. I think that's where both you and I had some problems. Where this with the like both a little bit of flare as well as the wider platform just makes like a kind of little bit more inherently guided platform. I also like the other things that locks the foot in well is that there are sidewalls now on the medial and lateral midfoot, which just locks the heel in really or the midfoot in really, really nicely. Mm-hmm. Plus, I could actually feel subtly the plate extensions into the medial and lateral side. So that just, again, not a stability shoe, but it definitely provides a little bit of like guidance that, you know, if you're somebody that needs, like, you start fatiguing a little bit for me, or if you need a little bit, like, maybe you're somebody that might like some mild stability, want something a little bit quicker, I think this might work. So for me personally, it is bordering into that stable neutral category. Personally, because of the little bit more flexibility, right? I shouldn't use that term. It's a solid shoe for me for easy runs. Do we want to hit the first, stick with one question at a time and then you go?
No,
or should I just go right into like,
I'll come back.
Yeah. So I think because it's a little more inherently stable in that kind of way, and you get a little bit more flexibility from the plate, I personally like using this more for daily training as well as doing some workouts in, especially like this is the kind of shoe where I like lightweight trainers because I don't know what I'm going to do each day. And if I decide to do a workout, this is going to be a great thing. Whereas the Pro 3, this is an aggressive shoe. The second you put this one on, you're like, whoa, yeah. Okay. Like, this thing is aggressive. It's stiff. It is going to make you go. It's hard to run slow in the Pro 3 just because of how much bounce there is to foam, or as Andrea Paulson would say, how much resilience the foam has. Like, when you put force into this, it kicks you forward. It's pretty stiff and feels really best going really fast. I can warm up and cool down in these, but I don't think I'd want to do that like if it is an easy run shoe, whereas the Speed 3 feels more relaxed in that manner. So that doesn't mean you can't race in the Speed 3. Like, I've done some great workouts in this shoe, and when you compress this foam, it really bounces back nicely. 100%. So if you want a shoe that has a little bit more flexibility, and maybe you don't like ones that are as stiff, both of them have a lot of compression to the foam. But I think the nylon plate may work better for people who want a little more inherently flexible, like slightly more flexible ride, versus people who like that stiff, aggressive ride. The Pro 3 is going to be better, but you have to figure out what works for you, because even though they have different weights, I think you could still do workouts and even race, especially some longer distances in the Speed. For shorter stuff, I'd choose the Pro every single day, but I think it's going to depend, still based on McLeod's study and some of the other studies out there that found that optimal bending stiffness is going to vary between each person. So you got to figure out what works for you and what kind of you want.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think?
No, I agree a lot there. Just to address the speed question that Made by Machines had, or Made in Machines, 11 to 12 kilometers, we got some math there. It's 9-minute miles around that. So, looking at that kind of pacing, no, you were pretty good. I think that it's pretty clear that the Speed is this more like versatile option that still can go super fast. And the Pro is like, lace it up when you're ready to rock. That's what it's for. Go run fast, go run long, fast, and kind of get yourself moving through it. So I think the Speed is a solid option for that if you're looking for something that has. So here's where my difference comes in though. So as long as you have to know like your stability. So if Made in Machines knows what stability they need, I would say that this shoe went from being unstable to neutral. So now this is just like, for me, a neutral shoe that, because they just for the same reasons, widening the base and the heel, as well as getting the plate width to go all the way across. That made this shoe for me from going for one that I couldn't go more than 5 or 6 miles in the previous versions, where I could go an hour and a half and feel nothing. Like, I thought it felt great. I finally felt like I can actually enjoy the Endorphin Speed. that so many people had loved. Like I always thought, like, obviously I understand why people love this shoe, but I just couldn't run a lot in it because the heel was too unstable for me, and I would always get sore in those stabilizer muscles. And so it's just nice to have something with a little bit wider platform. And I run in neutral shoes all the time. I usually don't need some stability at all. And I think that this fits that bill. But I think it's interesting, you know, Matt and I are different runners. We both did really well in this model from a stability standpoint. And so as Matt being someone who needs a little bit of stability, needs is a strong word, enjoys, I think that could maybe speak to this person's question a little bit more.
Does a little bit better with.
Does a little bit better with.
Yeah.
And I think you know, talking to Alex Miller, wanting the heel to not to be too squirrely, which I love that name. This definitely changes that. So if that was your only issue with previous ones, this is the one for you.
Better.
So
yeah. But I think anybody that might need like a little bit more inherent, I'm not going to say, I hesitate with stability, but a little bit more inherent guidance in the midfoot. I think that's what worked really, really well for me because my foot tends to be a little squirrely in the midfoot, which is why you hear me complain so much about going, why did this X shoe have a narrow midfoot? Why did they do this? It's not everybody needs that, but I generally do. And so I think the wider platform, the sidewalls, and the extended plates tend to work well for me. Whereas those I agree with you. I think the heel is definitely like brings it to neutral.
Yes.
Like it's not got anything crazy there. But the midfoot, they did a little bit better guiding stuff through there compared to which I had a really hard time with the midfoot too on the last one.
Yeah. Cool. The other person I'm going to bring in here who asked a question was Iacona23, and they said that 2 weeks ago they tried on the Speed 2, but immediately ruled it out because the cushioning seemed way too narrow, like that platform seemed too narrow. And do you think the Speed 3 is significantly wider and more stable? I would say in that scenario of what you're talking about, yes, because they said that they tend to like stable and roomy neutral shoes like the On Cloud Stratus, the Cloud Monster, New Balance More V3, etc. So that like wider base. This starts to go into that category, but I would say it's not quite as stable as something like the More V3. Like the More V3 platform is really wide. This is still performance fit and is more narrow, but for a performance trainer, higher stack performance trainer, that's where it verges on like, oh, for a higher stack performance trainer with a new gen foam and PWRRUN PB, yes, a little bit more stable. So I would say, that person, Iacona23, they should check this out and go try it on like you did with the Speed 2. You knew. It's cool. It seems like you know yourself. And I think that's great.
It's awesome. But this is compared to the shoes they mentioned, though, this is going to be more of the performance one compared to a lot of those shoes are going to be very different because a lot of those are, I don't want to say heavier, but they're definitely more true training shoes that typically aren't going to have the versatility into faster efforts. Maybe a little bit. Yeah. The more, definitely not. Right. That's not what its purpose is. But it's kind of moving a little bit more that direction, but it's not quite there.
Right. One of the things that we've both mentioned is we feel like although the foam compound is technically pretty much the same, Saucony has kind of confirmed that to us. It feels a little bit different underfoot, especially when we pick up the pace, and it's a bit more of this responsive, bouncy feel.
Yeah.
And we got a question again from Steve Nicholas, and he says, in your review, you mentioned the bounce. Is it more like the Rebel 2 or the Novablast when it comes to bounce? So how would you compare this shoe to those shoes, and why do you think it feels a little bit different in terms of bounce compared to previous versions?
Oh, that's a good question. I think because the previous versions, I don't know. I know you mentioned the rocker. It's got a nice roll to it, but the last ones felt the rocker was so aggressive. I was like, whoa, every time. Whereas this time it seemed to be integrated a lot better with the foam where, maybe it kind of, how do I say this? When I picked up the pace, I definitely got more of that pop off the ground as opposed to that rolling ride, only rolling ride versus last time. Whereas something like the Novablast and the, why am I forgetting what you just said? Rebel V2?
Rebel 2. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So those are really soft. And I found the Novablast unstable. I couldn't handle too much of that. The Rebel V2 was a solid shoe, but both those foams were, can I say this, extremely soft?
Yeah.
Can we say that? Like there was a lot of compression to the foams. The Novablast foam, I didn't feel like it popped back. I feel like it kind of like sank in And I was like, okay, this is cushioned shoe. The Rebel V2 had that kind of compression, but it did give some back because it was just a little more inherently close to the ground. So you got a little bit better ground feel. It just felt a little bit more snappy. Whereas I feel like this combines kind of the best of those two worlds without much ground feel, because it's a lot. It compresses a lot and then it rebounds quite a bit as well. Not in an aggressive way compared, like, because there's a little more the flexibility from the nylon plate, but just getting a lot more rebound out of the foam than I think previous, where it kind of rolled you in the other ones.
Right. And I actually totally agree there, because it's not, the Rebel V2 is, like I mentioned, mushy earlier. For me, the Rebel V2 is like super mushy, but it also does rebound a lot in a really surprising and fun way. But
when you run
it's
fast.
mushy. And and the Rebel V2 is mushy. The Speed 3 is not mushy. It's just not a mushy shoe. It only starts to get rebound when you pick up the pace a bit more, like I mentioned earlier. So in the rebound aspect of the Rebel V2, I would say it's similar in a rebound feel. However, it's closer to like the softness level of the Novablast for me, especially the Novablast 2, where they filled in the midsole a bit more. And I don't think you ran in the second version, right? You just ran in the first?
Nope.
Yeah, just the first one. So in the second one,
I was too afraid.
Yeah, the second one didn't feel
I'm just
quite
kidding.
as
They never sent it to me, actually.
Well, we didn't request it for you because you didn't have luck with it in the past. But I think that's where I think there's almost like a marriage between those two shoes, where you get the similar underground feel of the Novablast, but you get the rebound feel of the Rebel 2. And the Rebel is much more flexible, whereas this has a little bit less flexibility. There's still some, but it does have a little bit more of a rigid front to back than what you find in the Rebel, just because that's made to be lower to the ground and flexible. But I thought that was a good question too. So we talk about stability a lot, Matt, and
and we're not sorry about it.
Why do we talk about why do we talk about stability, and is stability better or worse?
Oh, this is a great question. So we want to clarify for the listeners. We talk about this a lot. And I think part of it comes maybe, and hopefully I'm not just making this about myself, it comes from where this thing started. Of somebody I have generally needed some degree of stability for, or tend to do better in some kind of stability. So when I first started this thing a long time ago, I found that, hey, traditional stability methods didn't always work, right? So posting, stuff like that, I could still have an unstable shoe, a shoe that didn't work for me, but it was considered a stability shoe. So I started looking at, okay, what methods can help get the foot to go forwards in other directions? So that's why I started talking about other things. And, it's not everyone needs this, okay? The goal with the running shoe is optimally to help you as you land to get you forward, okay? The more forward you go, obviously, the faster you're going to go, the more efficient you are. Okay, not all of us are really good at going forwards, right? Just listen to me talk and how many tangents I go on. I'm all over the place, right? My mechanics are a little bit similar to that. So, for some people, they might need a little bit help kind of keeping their tracking a little bit more forwards, right? We used to think that, hey, going in one direction was the only thing you need. It only needed to be pushing you laterally, right? But now we know that the actual, your movement path can vary along the entire foot length. It can be too far one way, then too far the other. Mm-hmm. So we try to talk about stability and guidance because some people need it, okay? And we're seeing this idea evolve where a lot of the stability shoes, the traditional ones, are actually starting to go away. We're not seeing them as much. So that's why I want to talk about this, to go, hey, for those of you that might need this and tend to feel, either if your mechanics kind of wobble a little bit, or if you tend to fatigue and things kind of fall apart with longer distances, we talk about this just so you have that option going. If that's something you need, great. Here are some options. Here are some shoes that may work. If you don't need this, there are some people that are very sensitive to this stuff. If you have stiffer mechanics, if the way your body moves, you do not like any influence in any direction, we also want you to go, hey, if you each say, hey, this shoe is like really pushing you in a certain way, you may want to avoid that shoe. So it's going to come down to the individual. I talk about it a lot because that's something I'm looking for personally, but other people may not need that at all, or they might be sensitive to that. And in that case, they're going to go, oh, I may need to avoid that shoe. Yeah. So it's not a one size fits all. And I think hopefully the variety that we get in talking about this gives people some idea of what either may or may not work for them. And yeah, maybe we need to rework how we say that word, right? In terms of when we have that section either in our reviews or that kind of stuff, you know, how do we... It's a good question. We always think about how do we better grade things. That's like stability. We grade it, right? About how stable something is, right? But we also don't always give stability shoes high marks, because oftentimes if they're too obtrusive or not great, we'll still drop it down. And there are some stability shoes that are very much not.
Yeah. So
it's a moving target. We're still trying to figure out how to best quantify this. And I don't know if it is. It might be more qualitative.
And it's not like we think that a zero shoe or a like XERO, like a zero shoe or a Kinvara or a Liberate from Puma, that's worse because they don't have structure or stability. That's not how we feel about shoes. But I think it's been pretty clear in the literature that if someone goes into a shoe like a zero shoe without preparing for it, you're gonna have problems.
Yes.
Now, are we? Right. It's very easy to also romanticize and idealize the idea of being strong enough to run in anything, and that's awesome. Right. But you do have to work to get there. And I think as rehabilitation specialists, we see enough people getting hurt that like if you want to start running, you're not just committing to going out and running all the time. You have to commit to doing programming that keeps you strong and keeps you healthy, because running is not the only thing that keeps you healthy. You got to do everything else to keep yourself healthy so you can run. And so I think it's easy to romanticize one way or another, and we are trying to bring people to a space where they can get into a shoe that helps them right now as they're on their running journey with their friends or their coaches or their PT or whomever is helping them guide towards healthier running and stronger running. And then we just talk about where does this shoe fit in that spectrum of structure and guidance and support. So I think that's kind of where we're at with it. But one more question that I think we need to talk about is, you know, given that this adds a little bit more structure and guidance than in a little bit more stable platform than the previous versions, they also just came out with the Tempus, right? So it's this PB shoe. You've heard us talk about it a lot. We got to work with Saucony on a cool project. Why choose who would want the Tempus versus who would want the Speed? Where's the differentiation? Are they pretty different or are they pretty similar? What do you say?
I think they both serve very different purposes. There are some similarities in like the foam, design, the drop, stuff like that, but they're also different shoes where if you really need stability, I don't think the Speed is going to work for you outside of maybe using it for shorter distances, right? It's stable, neutral, but if you have high stability needs, this may not be your best option just because it's again, stable, neutral, not stability. Whereas the Tempus is very much a stability shoe. I think it's going to work for a lot of people that need guidance, but they really worked really hard. The light is too bright to see this every single time because of the white foam. That's why the blue works better. Anyway, but the way the PWRRUN is built into this provides a lot more guidance, where this really is a stability shoe. But the way it's done, I think, is going to work for people who just want an inherently stable shoe and a really fun training shoe, right? But yeah, the Speed is not going to be able to handle people with true stability needs.
Yep. I 100% agree there.
Like when I'm beat up, I'm going to take the Tempus. Like that's my go-to. Like I know I need some stability. I am wrecked. I need this. Mm-hmm. At least I think I need this.
Yeah. I think that the Tempus is that workhorse trainer that we've had all of our testers who have ran in it. Some of them hate stability. Some of them love stability built into their shoes or structure or guidance. And everyone did well in it. And it's just one of those really protective, you know, softer, bouncy, kind of similar feel because you get the PWRRUN PB, but you also have a lot more guidance built into it. So for me, it's if you're looking for something for a workhorse trainer that can also do up tempo, and you're looking for a marathon racer, and you cannot handle all these higher stack shoes, the Tempus is a really, really solid option for you.
Solid option.
Yeah. Whereas like the Speed is still a neutral shoe. It's not going to be this new racer for people who have typical stability, like people who typically do better in stability shoes. It doesn't fit that bill. But
right.
it is now accessible for people like me to go do long runs and faster efforts without feeling beat up because of the heel instability. So I think there's a lot of divergence between them. But the Tempus verges a little bit more, and it just verges more on that like trainer and guided ride, and very protective.
Right.
And the Speed can do a little bit of both. So cool.
Agreed.
Is there anything else? What do you think is the future for a shoe like this? You know, like, have we reached the pinnacle? Because it was funny. I was thinking about, you saw it in my review, Matt, but like when we do our recommendations section, and this was one of those first times that I was like, I'm just going to enjoy this shoe for a while, because I couldn't think of any big recommendations. I finally found one, and I should add it. Mainly it's this groove in the bottom is a rock catcher, and it's super annoying, especially like I have a lot of gravel trails around, and I get rocks in this stupid little groove all the time. That's my new recommendation. But otherwise, I just thought it was a wonderful performance trainer. But where do you think the future needs to go with this shoe? What's next?
Yeah, I feel like I was kind of stuck in that situation too. Like, it felt just a teeny bit short, but I think for a performance shoe, that's perfect, and that's kind of where it needs to be. I'm in the same boat where I'm not quite sure where it needs to be, because in my classic thing, I'm always like, oh, it needs more stability, whatever. No, that's not the purpose of this shoe. So I think it's really good, especially for where we are right now in terms of looking at performance trainers and things like that can be versatile enough for people that maybe don't do as well on the super stiff carbon fiber plates, might be able to use this either as a trainer or a long run, or even a longer distance race shoe, like half marathon, maybe even 10K for some people, I think is really good. So I don't really have any major suggestions, because I feel like if you make it a lot lighter, you're going to have to sacrifice something. And I don't know what you would want to sacrifice in this shoe. So I feel like it's not that we're hitting a pinnacle. It's just our understanding of where things need to go. I think this is going to challenge us to go, okay, we always need to be making forward progress, but now where do we need to go? Right? For the greater like population, right? What do we need to be thinking about? And so I think I'm a little bit stuck on that. I'm sure there is something, and I'm sure they're working on something, but yeah, it's a good question. I don't have an answer yet.
Yeah, I think the one thing that the shoe and the new Pro have made me think about again is people who have first ray issues, like their big toe. Yeah, they're lacking some extension in that. And I was talking to a patient of mine this past week about this, and they were telling me they had a big race coming up, and they're like, I just started having a ton of pain at the kind of ball of my foot, right underneath kind of where that first ray is. And I was like, put on your Endorphin Pros and see if that's, because they run in the Speed a lot. And I said, put on your Endorphin Pros and see if that feels different. And they did that, and they got through the race with no pain. And the big difference was the flexibility of the forefoot and the amount of the rocker. The Pro 3 accentuates that forefoot rocker more, which is going to potentially offload that first ray even a bit more for people who either lack some or are having some irritation in that first ray, whereas the Speed, you're still going to get some flexibility. So think about who you are and what you might need, and the Pro gives you a little bit more of a stiff rocker. And but versus, so in the past, the Speed 2 and the Pro 2 were built the same except the plate. And that's why, for me, I could do so much better in the Pro, because the carbon plate was more stable. Now, and now we have a more stable heel built into the Speed and a very different Pro 3. And so I think from a racing standpoint, for someone like me who's running a marathon at like a 3:30 marathon, what direction would I go? And I think it's a harder choice at this point to determine, do you want something that's really propulsive forward like the Pro and feels higher stack and is higher stack and more bouncy feeling, or something that rolls along really nice? I think that's another, they did a good job, I think, in this, because something I said in my last reviews of the previous was there's not enough differentiating between the Speed and the Pro, and now there's a lot more. So I thought that was interesting. And
I said the same thing, and I think that was really good. And to answer your question about, hey, what shoe do I take out? it's, especially if you're doing longer distances, you're going to need to practice this during your long run. You're going to need to take, if you have both of these, you're going to need to take them out and go, hey, which one do I feel better in? Which one do I, run the pace I want to in and feel like I can actually finish the race in? It's not necessarily going to be the most aggressive shoe, right? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So you have to figure out what's working for your body. And that's part of remembering that training is not just building up to the race, but it's also practicing and figuring out the tools that are going to work best on that day.
Yeah, 100%. One final question for you, and this is going to bring us back around full circle into the conversation about softness. And this is a question from a listener, from Steve, and they have a question about durometer, and they're asking, do you actually measure, do a durometer test of the shoes that you run in and that you test? What would you recommend for midsole check on how firm or soft they are, like shoe A versus C versus D? So what do you think about that question, Matt? First, do we test durometer?
No,
we don't.
No.
I think that there was a really good one of our podcasts with the one with Jeff Burns. He talks about durometer tests and what value they have. He argues that there really is not value to it. So go back and listen to his rationale and see if you agree or disagree. But if we leave that question out of it about durometer, how would you, as a person in a running store or whatever, how would you check the firmness or softness, A, B, or C? And how do you, when you're comparing something like the Novablast to the Rebel 2 versus the Speed 3, something like that?
Put it on. I'm sorry. So yeah, you're going to have to put it on your feet because softness and cushioning is a subjective experience, right? So you can have a measurement of durometer, but that's not taking into account a couple things. One, if you're talking about shoes with plates, right, the plate is going to add additional stiffness and oftentimes, depending on the location, could add firmness. I think the biggest example of this is the Metaspeed Sky Plus, which I have found to be a fairly firm shoe, even though it's using Flight Foam Turbo, but the plate sits right underneath your foot, so it feels a lot firmer. If you take a durometer measurement, that's not going to get taken up, right? So it's not just the foam you're feeling. It's if there is a plate, it's going to be the outsole. It's going to be the insole. There's a lot of factors that go into there. And honestly, if you're in a running store, I would put one on each foot and see how that feels. Then put the other one on the foot, on the other foot, put the other one on the other foot. It's going to be subjective and you need to test them at a variety of paces because shoes also respond differently at different speeds. So use them for what you plan them to. So again, to wrap back around, like Jeff Burns talked about in that episode, there's too many factors that go into the subjective experience of softness, comfort, and cushioning. So you're going to have to figure it out to put it on your foot to figure that out. Yeah. I know that's probably not the answer that people want, but that's not only what the research suggests, that's kind of what we're seeing just from how complex this stuff is.
Right.
What was the phrase? What was the phrase he used? Was it? Yeah. Jeff talked about it's the shoe is your interface with the ground. Was he the one that said that?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. And that was a new way of thinking about that for me, going, oh, that's interesting, right? It's in some way, you got to think about all the components of the shoe are going to, it's kind of like playing telephone, right? Where you have something come in one ear and something else comes out the other. It's depending on who you've got in that line, it's going to change what gets translated back and forth. And that's kind of the same way with shoes. It's going to vary, and it's going to vary depending on the person.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, there's a review of the Endorphin Speed 3. It's been really weird this year, 2022. We were talking about how many rough shoes have we tested this year, and it's been a low number, which feels weird. There have not been a lot of duds. We're just having a lot of solid shoes come through. Yeah, just a lot of really good options.
This year has been there's been one or two ooh, that maybe wasn't the best. But the majority overall have been, whoa, this is a great, mind-blowing. So we're really excited to talk about a couple more of them that we can't say. Actually, probably by the time this episode comes out. I won't do it.
Getting sketchy. Yeah, don't do it
yet. There's
just
some solids. Don't do it yet.
Yeah.
There's been some cool stuff. People are catching up.
It's been a solid year. And I think, a couple that I can think of, like the Adios Pro 3 didn't work for David. There's been a couple of those one-off shoes that just didn't work for certain people, but design and shaping of geometries, I think, has gone a long way. So it's been a fun year. And Yeah. So you can check out everything that we're doing on doctorsofrunning.com. You can be following our work on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. We have all of those things continually uploading there. If you have any recommendations for podcast episodes or people that you want us to bring on, please let us know. You can email us at doctorsofrunningpodcast@gmail.com or send us a direct message on Instagram. We do get a lot of stuff coming to us, so we do get it. We hear it from you and we'll respond when we can, but we do love to hear your feedback and thoughts that you have and things that you want us to push forward. So thanks again for joining us tonight, and we will see you on the next episode.